Okay, so I'm starting with my torso block front and back patterns. So starting with the front pattern, I'm literally just measuring from my waist all the way down to where I want the bottom of my skirt to be. I did it off camera and I have it here on the screen how long my skirt will be. And I literally just traced the bottom half of my front torso block, so from the waist to the hem. I traced the dart as well for both pieces. And then I took a ruler and I drew a straight line down the middle of the dart, stopping at the hem of the skirt. And I did this offline because I think it's pretty explanatory. So the next thing I did is I cut the front pattern into two separate pieces, and I have a diagram here of where exactly you should be cutting in order to get the two separate pieces. So after I cut out the two pieces, I measured the top edge of the center front piece, and I got 4.25. And then I divided that measurement by 3, so 4.25 divided by 3 is 1.4, and I just measured and marked 1.4 at the top of that panel, and then I just drew two vertical lines connecting down to the bottom of the pattern. And I did the same thing with the side front pattern piece, so I divided that top edge by 3, and that was about 1, so 3 divided by 3 is 1, so I measured and marked 1 inch, and then from those two marks that I made, I just drew a long vertical line connecting to the bottom of the hem. And now I just did the slash and spread method, so I literally just cut down the vertical lines, and then I just made sure to keep the pieces intact, so I didn't cut all the way through so that the pieces can expand freely. So I wanted to start manipulating that center front panel first, so I just took it and put it on top of another sheet of tracing paper, and you can either tape or glue down that first strip. I chose to glue it down because I thought it was a little neater, so I just glued it fully down, and then I just measured and marked 3/4 of an inch to the side of that first pattern piece, and then I just took the second pattern piece and I just glued it right on top of that mark. And then I measured 3/4 of an inch from that second pattern piece and then glued down the third pattern piece on that mark. And that's how I was able to slash and spread my pattern. And then I realized that I needed more space, so I took another sheet of pattern paper and I just taped it down so that I could have more space to actually draft the button placket. So I drew a 1-inch line at the top edge of the pattern, and then I drew another 1-inch line at the bottom edge of the pattern. And then I used a vertical line to connect those two horizontal lines that I just drew. And then I repeated the same thing again. So I drew another 1-inch line at the top and at the bottom. And then I drew a vertical line to connect those two horizontal lines. So you should basically have two rectangles, and this is going to be for the button placket. So I basically just closed up the open gaps of where the pattern is slashed and spread. And then I labeled the pattern. So I labeled this piece center front button skirt, and then I also said that seam allowance is needed and that I would need to cut two pieces of this pattern. So then I took the side front pattern and I made a mark 3/4 of an inch away from the side seam so that the total width of my hem would be 7.5 inches. And then I didn't want my skirt to be so curved. I wanted it to be more asymmetrical, so I folded the curved edge of my skirt, and then I drew a diagonal line connecting to that mark that I had previously made. And this made my skirt more like triangular shape rather than a hip hugger. And then I just drew a horizontal line to connect to that point. And again, this extra line is what makes that hem 7.5 inches. Then I labeled this pattern piece side front button skirt, cut 2 times, and I also said that seam allowance is needed. So in the end, I didn't end up slashing and spreading this part of the pattern. Instead, I just cut all around the pattern piece. So here is a diagram of where I cut along the pattern, and then I ended up adding an extra label to the center front. I just said that it's a 2-inch button placket included. Okay, now to make my waistband pattern, I took another sheet of paper and I placed the 2 pattern pieces on top of the piece of paper, and I lined them up so that the top edge of both pieces were touching. And then essentially I just wanted to trace the top edge, but before I traced the top edge, I just put down a paper weight to keep everything in place. And then I folded the button placket. Now I made a mistake here, so instead of folding the 2 rectangles, I should have only folded 1 rectangle. So disregard that and pretend that I have 1 extra rectangle sticking out. And I traced the top edge of the 2 patterns, and I also traced along the side of both patterns, and I only traced about 1 inch of the sides, and so I was left with 2 vertical lines that are about 1 inch long, and I just drew a horizontal line to connect those 2 vertical lines to create half of the waistband pattern. And then I just labeled it waistband facing, cut 1 time on fold for the back pattern, and then cut 2 times for the front pattern, and then seam allowance is needed. And I also labeled the center so that when I'm folding it, I know where the middle is. Okay, so for my back pattern, I took the side front pattern and I placed it on the back pattern, making sure to line up the side of the dart with the side of the side front pattern. And then I just took a paper weight and just placed it on top of that side front pattern to make sure that it wouldn't shift. And then what I did was I just traced the diagonal line of that side front pattern so that I could shape the back pattern symmetrically to that front pattern. And then I just removed the paper weights and I removed that pattern, and then I just extended the original hem all the way to the diagonal line. And then I already titled my pattern previously, so the next thing I did was I cut out the pattern, and I just kind of labeled it like so: back button skirt, cut 2 times, and no seam allowance is included. And I also cut out the dart because it makes it easier to transfer onto the fabric, and these are my 4 pattern pieces. So now it's time for us to transfer the pattern pieces over to our fabric so that we can actually start assembling our skirt. And if you want to see how I did that, check out part 2 of this tutorial, and let me know if you have any questions about this part 1. See you next time. Ciao.